For once, it seemed to be going her way. Theresa May on deadline day in Brussels Monday with what seemed like enough of a breakthrough to finally take Brexit negotiations to the next level. Divorce bill, check. EU citizens' right, check. Suddenly, though, enter Arlene Foster, the Northern Irish First Minister, objecting to a special status post-Brexit for the EU's only land border with the United Kingdom, on one that's open thanks to the Good Friday Agreement on Northern Ireland. Foster's unionist DUP party only has 10 seats in the House of Commons, but those 10 seats are what's propping up the minority government of Theresa May. Will she bend or bring it down? What's Ireland's post-Brexit future? May's got another fire to put out across the Irish Sea. The deal offered to Dublin and Belfast has Scotland's nationalist First Minister insisting she too wants a special open border status with the EU. Political brinkmanship? Or could leaving the European Union precipitate an unwinding of the United Kingdom as we know it? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the big Brexit border bother that May faces while the clock ticks. And with us from London, he's a former advisor to two UK business secretaries. Leo Ringer of Political Risk Consultants Global Counsel. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
Joining us from Derry in Northern Ireland, political commentator Patricia McBride. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
And here in the studio, Yves Bertoncini, president of the French branch of the pro-EU advocacy group European Movement.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. The France 24 debate. On Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. UK Prime Minister hoping to persuade the DUP and perhaps return to Brussels as early as Thursday, clearing most but not all of her schedule. Theresa May spoke earlier in the company of her visiting Spanish counterpart.
Our talks with the European Union have made a lot of progress. There are still a couple of issues we need to work on, but we'll be reconvening in Brussels later this week as we look ahead to the December European Council.
Yeah, the issue at hand is Ireland. More precisely, that border, which has been open under the terms of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that ended 3 decades of violence in the north. Alison Sargent explains.
If anyone knows the Irish border, it's this British truck driver. While he lives in Northern Ireland, he makes numerous deliveries down south in the Irish Republic. He's about to cross the border for the 4th time today.
Here we are in Ireland, and this great sign ahead, welcome to Northern Ireland. Now we have crossed the border. It's so simple. There are no restrictions. There are no police, there are no customs. It's so seamless.
Today, the border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland can only be seen on a map. It has some 200 crossing points and roads that go from one side to the other 5 or 6 times in several kilometers. The British government has promised that there will be no physical border when the UK leaves the EU, but the head of this Irish transportation company has a hard time believing it.
I don't see how they're going to do it. They have to come up with the solutions. There has to be at least, 10% of goods or vehicles have to be checked. Even by doing that, it's going to have delays. It's very hard to see how they're going to avoid a physical border if they have left the customs unions.
Northern Ireland still bears the scars of the 30-year conflict between unionists and Irish nationalists that killed over 3,000 people. Shared membership in the European Union played a major role in easing tensions between North and South.
The whole idea of the EU was to bring down borders. And now we're back into a situation where there's going to be a border right across the island of Ireland. It's madness.
It's an opinion shared by many in Northern Ireland. 56% of the region voted to remain in the EU, a number closer to 60% in constituencies along the border.
Patricia McBride, do you remember the bad old days when there was indeed a hard border?
I very much remember those days when going to Dublin, or even myself going from Derry into the neighbouring county of Donegal, was faced with a hard border checkpoint staffed by British military and customs officers. So there were both customs, immigration and security implications there. No one wants to see a return to that. So what we need to do, and what the EU27 needs to do, is to come up with a workable solution with the British government. We're in a situation now where the DUP are saying, we don't want a hard border. We won't accept a border in the Irish Sea, but we want to leave the customs union. Those three things can't coexist. One of them has to give. The question is which one?
The question is which one, and what does your crystal ball tell you?
Well, the most logical and most reasonable solution is that that any controls regarding the movement of goods or people is at the ports, because that is something that happens already. If you look at the situation currently, since the Good Friday Agreement was signed, there are 142 areas of north-south cooperation on the island of Ireland. These are, you hear the phrase that we hear, regulatory convergence, where our systems meet and mirror one another. Now, that sounds like a very grand terminology, but what that means in practice is that we have a single electricity market on the island of Ireland, for example. We buy our electricity as an island. We have a system where children's heart surgery for every citizen in the island who needs it takes place in Dublin. We have a situation where specialist cancer treatment takes place here at the local hospital in Derry at Altnagelvin, and that's on an all-island basis. So we have a sharing of services. We have a sharing of agricultural policy. We do have differing agricultural standards than Great Britain. So, for example, during the crisis over foot and mouth disease, when Britain was essentially locked down as an agricultural economy, we were able to continue trading throughout the island of Ireland because we had strict agricultural arrangements to allow that to happen.
All right, so
what we're doing,
difficult then to imagine an unwinding of how much it's become integrated, the economies of Northern Ireland and the Republic. And again, while all the action seemed to be happening in Brussels, it was a phone call home from Theresa May to the Northern Ireland First Minister that put Belfast on the map Monday.
We have been very clear, Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland economically or politically from the rest of the UK.
Over in Dublin, the Irish Prime Minister expressing surprise and disappointment, Leo Varadkar adding this is, quote, not a new issue.
The most difficult issue we faced was to obtain a cast iron agreement and a written guarantee that there will not be a hard border on the island of Ireland after Brexit. I want to offer the reassurance that there is no hidden agenda here. Our only guiding light is the Good Friday Agreement, which clearly states that the constitutional status of Northern Ireland cannot be changed without the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. And this is fundamental to our position.
Leo Ringer, the unionists say they were caught by surprise by what Theresa May had to offer on the telephone Monday. Is that true, you think?
I think it's really interesting the way that Theresa May's approached this round of negotiations, trying to move the debate onto phase two, those trade talks. The one thing she's done well, certainly better than last time in October, is that she's lined up the European negotiation much more deliberately. She's engaged earlier, conversations she had, timing today with Tusk and others. But it seems that in doing that, in focusing on teeing up the European side of the negotiation, her and David Davis, UK negotiating team, have somehow allowed the conversation with Arlene Foster and the DUP to fall somewhere between the cracks. Now, whether you believe Arlene Foster's account that she didn't see the draft document until very recently or not, either way, she has chosen to deploy essentially her veto with the UK government. So however you judge the events of the last 24 to 72 hours, can't come away with the conclusion that Theresa May has done everything she needed to. In Northern Ireland and indeed Dublin,
Leo, I'm going to interrupt you because we're having a few issues with the connection. We're going to try to call you back and get a better line so we can hear the audio better. I want to turn to Yves Bertoncini. Whatever happened, it's clear Theresa May did not have her ducks in order when she went to Brussels on Monday. What does that tell you?
Well, apparently not. I think she's in a trap between, in a contradiction between the fact that she said, and this is key, that the UK will go out of the single market and the customs union, not only out of the EU, and then the fact that if she sticks on this position, which is an interpretation of the referendum verdict, kind of hard Brexit interpretation, of course there's a dilemma in Ireland. And since now that she relies on the DUP for a majority, which is weakened, well, of course, either there is a border between the two parts of Ireland, and it's, compulsory, more or less, if the UK is out of the single market and the customs union, or there's no border, but this would mean that the UK accepts to stay more or less in the single market and customs union while going out of the EU.
All right, so we're getting to the important terminology here, and bear with us, viewers, if it's a little bit technical, but there are two words here that are crucial. Regulatory alignment. Before, the language was that effectively the North would have to be locked in to EU laws when it comes to trade. Now they've changed it to the UK can retain regulatory alignment with the EU. People are saying that its terminology is a little bit fuzzy.
Yes, sure.
So each side can interpret it and each side can save face. You agree?
Sure. The only guarantee you have is to
What does that mean for you, regulatory alignment?
Well, kind of second best solution if you don't stick to a common norms under the jurisdictions of a common court, which would be the ECJ. The single market, it's clear. You have the single norm and then the European Court of Justice to guarantee that the norm is applied. If you don't accept any longer the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, be it direct or indirect, maybe there's a way out, indirect jurisdiction, maybe. If you don't accept this, and if you say, well, there will be EU norms on the one hand, and let's say British, meaning Northern Irish norms on the other hand, you can say, okay, but I promise the norms will be copy-pasted. It will be copy-paste. It will be the same. But the problem there is who will guarantee that it will really be the same? Not only the day after the Brexit, but 1 year after.
What are you saying, Yves? That it's the European Court of Justice or nobody else?
Well, apparently there could be a way out there from Brussels and the other capitals in accepting maybe not the direct jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice.
Which the UK no longer wants.
Okay, but something like maybe the EFTA Court, the European Free Trade Agreement, there is a court there, or an ad hoc court, maybe. This could be. But then, in any case, the guarantee given would be less reliable than the Court of Justice. Now, there's a need to have a political agreement. So, of course, it's a basic business, daily business in Brussels to find the terminology. You have mentioned the word. Well, not to save faces, but to open an interpretation which could be acceptable by both parts. That could be feasible. The problem is, in the longer run, who will guarantee that if there's no border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which would be welcome, seen from Brussels, Paris, and Berlin, who will guarantee that efficient checks will be made, not only on people but also on products, so that once in Ireland, they can come into the single market freely. And there would be a doubt there. So I think in Brussels and the other capitals, there's a will to try and help Theresa May in delivering not a deal.
So you're saying there is a compromise that's possible?
Yes, but that would be so much easier if Theresa May had not said that he wants to exit from the single market and the customs union. Because in this case,
the single
deal
market
would be easier.
And the customs union are two separate things. Leo Ringer, I believe we have the connection back with London. For you, what does regulatory alignment mean?
For me, it's a really clever piece of politics. The phrase regulatory alignment as a phrase in international trade policy actually doesn't mean anything. When you go out there and you scour agreements globally for the phrase regulatory alignment, it essentially means whatever you want it to mean. And this is a device that is a part of a fudge that is going to allow this issue of the Northern Irish border to be dealt with to a certain degree, but then allow the talks to move on. The UK has consistently argued that we can't solve the issue of the Northern Irish border outside of a discussion about the future trading relationship between the UK and the EU. So what they've got to do is say enough now that it's sufficiently ambiguous that allows us to move on. And this phrase regulatory alignment is a device that can mean lots of things to lots of different people on both sides of the negotiation without having to really specify and get into too much detail.
So Leo, a senior diplomat quoted by the French news agency AFP, says effectively Theresa May has until the end of this week if she wants to secure some kind of an agreement with Brussels by next week's summit that's taking place there. The clock is ticking. Is this all just grandstanding and it's going to blow over?
The clock is definitely ticking, and it's really critical for the UK government that they are seen to make progress at the December Council on the 14th and the 15th. So there's a few days in which to secure the agreement. But I think on the EU side, Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, came out and said, look, I've got my draft guidelines here for phase 2 ready to go. There's a lot of sort of preparedness and will this time around on the EU side to trigger those talks. But, here we are. Leo Varadkar has walked everyone up to the cliff. He's threatened to make this an issue on which he won't allow talks to progress. And it's hard to see now how we move forward. I think probably the best solution for the UK government is to follow the advice that Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Conservative Party in Scotland, came out with today, which is to say that commitment to regulatory alignment with the Republic of Ireland doesn't just apply to the Northern Ireland, but it applies to the whole of the UK. And that, in my eye, would meet Arlene Foster's concern about the drift over time between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, and it would essentially join the two together in a way that's politically palatable to the DUP.
Can you spread regulatory alignment to the rest of the UK? Will the DUP call Theresa May and the Dublin government's bluff? We'll pick up on those points when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.
Reporters, presented by Mark Owen.
The world's first climate refugees flee the Caribbean island of Barbuda, since devastated by Hurricane Irma. The authorities took the unprecedented decision to evacuate the entire population to the neighbouring island of Antigua, where they are now living in makeshift accommodation.
The larger countries have not quite stepped up. They are really the profligate users of fossil fuel. So clearly they're contributing to climate change, to warmer seas, more frequent and ferocious storms or hurricanes. And at the same time, we're not seeing that type of responsibility in terms of assisting in loss and damage.
Our reporters have been to meet some of those who have returned to the devastated island and still hope for support from the international community.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, speculation mounting that Donald Trump Wednesday will be announcing the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It would be the only foreign embassy in that city. He's been on the phone with leaders of the Palestinians, Egypt, Jordan, who have been confirming as much. Lebanon's prime minister formally withdraws his resignation offer. Saad Hariri's U-turn follows pledges by all parties that support his unity government, they include Hezbollah, to disassociate themselves from regional conflicts. Spain's top court withdraws its extradition request for Carles Puigdemont, the Catalan separatist leader who's campaigning in snap elections from Belgium. And the International Olympic Committee to decide whether to maintain Russia's doping ban at the upcoming Winter Games. Kedavan Gorgistani will have all the day's sports. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We are looking at whether or not Theresa May can scramble what looked like, until yesterday early afternoon, like a major breakthrough in Brexit negotiations. Her junior coalition partners from the unionist DUP in Northern Ireland are against the terms of the open border with Dublin. We're talking about it with, from Derry in Northern Ireland, political commentator Patricia McBride. In London, Leo Ringer, of the head of UK Global Council, the political risk consultancy. And here in the studio, Yves Bertoncini, chair, you say chair or president? President of the French branch of European Movement, of a pro-EU advocacy group. Just before the break, we were talking about this notion of regulatory alignment that one prominent Scottish Conservative says should be extended to the whole of the UK. And by the way, there was another precinct heard from on Monday, Scotland's Nationalist First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, putting out a tweet. In it, she says if one part of the UK can retain regulatory alignment with the EU and effectively stay in the single market, which is the right solution for Northern Ireland, there is surely no good practical reason why others can't. And of course, after she said that, Leo Ringer, that had hard Brexiteers up in arms. No way, they say.
Yeah, and the real challenge for Theresa May here is to stop this thread unravelling across the United Kingdom. So when Nicola Sturgeon says there is no practical reason why Scotland shouldn't be different, I think I'd say there is a practical reason, and that practical reason is the Good Friday Agreement and the particularly sensitive nature of Northern Ireland and the relationship with the Republic. But the challenge Theresa May has is not to feed a nationalist narrative in Scotland that actually since the Scottish referendum we had a few years ago in the UK has largely been dormant, and I think expectations were that question had been answered possibly for a generation. What Theresa May can ill afford at this stage is to allow this development in Northern Ireland to trigger a broader question about the constitutional
You're right, it has gone dormant, Leo.
And indeed the single market.
Leo, you're right, it has gone dormant for the most part. We recall that after the Remain in the UK won by 10 points in that referendum, there was this white paper on devolution to other parts. But as you say, it went dormant. Would you say that Arlene Foster has reawakened that nationalist feeling with her remarks and the to and forth between her and the Irish Prime Minister?
Well, I think you've got to remember, actually, Arlene Foster's objective here is to absolutely continue the UK as a single unified entity and to avoid a distinction between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. So in fact, her objective is to do the precise opposite. It's not to fuel the disintegration of the Union. That's her primary political objective. I think you have to look at Leo Varadkar's position in the Republic of Ireland and look at the game he's playing there, which is a game of essentially pretty high stakes poker. He's prepared to walk, as I said, everyone up to the cliff as far as they'll go here. And will he retreat? Is one of the key questions for May over the next 24 hours as she tries to unlock this. But the point about the Brexiteers being up in arms, and to your question, it's absolutely crucial. Can Theresa May sell to her cabinet the idea of a whole UK that remains aligned with the Republic in order to solve the border question? And will the Brexiteers around the cabinet table, the Michael Goves, the Boris Johnsons and the Liam Foxes, go along with that, having already swallowed the idea of a 2-year transition while the UK essentially, for intents and purposes, remains very closely aligned to the EU.
All right, let's take this one by one then, all these fires to put out. First of all, let's start with Ireland again. Patricia McBride, do you see Arlene Foster bringing down the government?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I don't think Leo is correct when he says that Leo Varadkar has walked Europe up to a cliff. Arlene Foster yesterday, when that meeting was going on between Jean-Claude Juncker and Theresa May, pushed the leader that she's supposed to be supporting over the cliff Everyone expected that that deal was going to happen yesterday. Arlene Foster is coming out this evening and saying that not only were the DUP not given the text, but it was withheld on the instructions of the Irish government. This is an interview she gave on to the Irish national broadcaster RTE today. That's a very, very serious charge, that the Irish instructed that the text be withheld, and one that I am sure that the Irish government will contest very strongly. But we have to look really at the power that the DUP might wield. Bear in mind that at the last election to Westminster, to the British Parliament, the DUP had around 280 first preference votes, 280,000 first preference votes. Europe has a population of 742 million people. There is no way that less than 1/3 of 1% is going to of the population is going to hold Europe to ransom. Something has got to give, and what has got to give is that the DUP needs to come up with a workable solution. It's very, very clear from the text the text messages, the tweets that we saw from Donald Tusk over the weekend, from his meeting with Leo Varadkar in Dublin, that the EU27 is firmly behind Ireland here in terms of the negotiations. Now, the reality is that right now, could Arlene Foster bring down the government? Possibly, but I don't see that how anyone in the British Parliament would see that that would be in the best interest of the country. Theresa May called an election earlier this year because she wanted to increase her majority. The fact that she lost her overall majority, lost a significant number of seats, is interpreted as a vote against the Tory direction on Brexit, against the direction that her party is taking. And what Eve said earlier is absolutely correct. When the referendum on Brexit proceeded, that wasn't a referendum on what Brexit actually meant. The details of the deal haven't been agreed, and that's why you see this continuing requests from Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, from Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales, and even from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Remember, London voted by a majority to remain within the EU. So all of them are saying, well, hold on, the terms that are being foisted upon us are not acceptable. So I think the issue down the road has to be, when the final Brexit deal is made, whether that's going to be acceptable to the population of the UK as a whole. And the issue around accountability, I mean, if the issue is around the ECJ and whether that can be an accountability mechanism for regulatory alignment, well, yes, but the ultimate mechanism is the international treaty that is the Good Friday Agreement, and the mechanisms that are there to ensure the accountability of the two sovereign states who are signatories to that, and with the oversight of Europe, who underpinned and supported the peace process, and who have very clearly said during these negotiations that nothing must happen that damages or puts at risk the Good Friday Agreement.
Yves Bertoncini, you agree, yes, she could make the government fall, but it's unlikely because nobody in the Commons wants that.
Well, the same is true for the hard Brexiters, because they all know that if there's no alternative, I mean, if there's a new election, Jeremy Corbyn is likely to win, if we look at the polls. So at least Theresa May has a life insurance, if I may say. She's fragile. She has a majority relying on the DUP, but the perspective...
And Jeremy Corbyn, who in a previous life was very close to Sinn Féin, or even campaigned for them.
So, but the problem in this particular issue, I mean, Northern Ireland, is that it's there's an asymmetry between the UK and the EU. What I mean is that as regard the divorce bill, of course, for the EU and for all the other capitals, it was vital to have a good deal for them, because it's money for them. As regards the citizens of the EU who live at the moment in the UK and the other in the continent, there was a vital interest. But let me be a bit cynical. The fact to respect the Good Friday Agreement is more crucial for Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the UK that for the other EU members. Of course, they all want...
Because one of the issues, one of the solutions that's been touted by the former head of the World Trade Organization, Frenchman Pascal Lamy, is give Northern Ireland the same status that Taiwan or Hong Kong or Macau have.
And in addition, there are, seen from Brussels, Paris, Berlin, there are very easy options. You have mentioned one. I mentioned the fact to let the UK as a whole in the single market and in the customs union. So what I mean is that, of course, the partners of Theresa May would like to reach an agreement, if not an agreement, sufficient progress is next week. But the margin of maneuver is not that high for her.
It's not that high. Patricia McBride, just very briefly, Belfast, in theory, could be this sort of gateway to Britain under this deal. Why is the DUP against it?
Well, your guess is as good as mine and as good as many of my friends and neighbours living here in the north of Ireland. I mean, the reality is that if the DUP were to accept a status of a border in the Irish Sea, continued regulatory compliance with Dublin on the issues that are already agreed, then you could see a situation where the North becomes a favoured area for international investment, for companies that see that as a gateway into the EU, for companies that feel that they must relocate out of Great Britain, out of mainland Great Britain, if you wish. So it's almost a case of cutting off their nose to spite their face, and this is what no one can quite understand. But fundamentally, I think that when push comes to shove, when Leo said there is time for agreement to happen, I think he's right. We do have 2 weeks before, or we have 10 days, I suppose, before the summit concludes. And I think we could see a very cold relationship between the Conservatives and the DUP developing in that period of time.
All right, so there's the fire to put out in Northern Ireland, obviously, and the one that Leo Ringer was mentioning within Theresa May's own cabinet. Listen to the tone of the UK Prime Minister's very own Brexit minister as he rebuffed those who are in favour of extending some kind of a free trade or customs union outside of just Ireland.
Suggestion that we might depart the European Union but leave one part of the United Kingdom behind, still inside the single market and customs union. That is emphatically not something that the UK government is considering. So when the First Minister of Wales complains about it, or the First Minister of Scotland says a reason to start banging the tattered drum of independence, or the Mayor of London says it justifies a hard border around the M25, I say they're making a foolish mistake. No UK government would allow such a thing, let alone a Conservative and Unionist one.
Leo Ringer, is that true? Is that the position of the Prime Minister?
Yeah, David Davis is speaking for the Prime Minister when he makes that statement. And he's also speaking to the DUP in a day when they have essentially rebuffed the deal because it fails to secure, in their eyes, the constitutional integrity of the UK. Davis is standing up and making a very clear statement that we get you, we're on your side, your objectives are our objectives. But just to come back to one of the things Patricia said, I mean, there's a really important economic reason as well as a social reason why the DUP don't want a border in the North Sea, in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the UK. 90% of Northern Irish exports and sales go to mainland England. So what you're asking the exporting businesses of Northern Ireland to face is a hard customs border with at least minimal customs facilitation, if not more, between them and their main export market. So there's a big economic point to this as well as a social and a political one.
And so, but it sounds, listening to the words of David Davis, like it's a pretty emphatic no to any form of wiggle room when it comes to a customs union.
I think what Davis is saying is he's not going to carve out special status for Northern Ireland that allows it to remain in the single market and the customs union as they are currently framed within the EU. So he's kind of ruling out the premise of putting a border in the North Sea. I still think it's completely possible within that broader parameter for them to find a fudge that pleases everyone that allows talks to move on to phase 2 next week. But it's about people backing down from their political from the edge of the cliff. When I said Leo Varadkar's walked us all to the edge of the cliff, what I meant was he has chosen to make this the moment in time at which he insists on a resolution to the Northern Irish question and is not relaxed about the prospect of dealing with that in phase 2 of the talks.
Patricia McBride?
It's absolutely essential that the issue of the border and where trade tariffs and free movement, where the movement of people will be managed in order to move to phase 2 of the talks. How can you negotiate a trade deal if you don't know the parameters of that deal? And when you're talking about, it goes back to my original point, when David Davis says we don't want to stay in the customs union, we don't want a border in the Irish Sea, we don't want a hard border on the island of Ireland. The Conservative government has yet to put forward a solution that addresses the fact that you cannot have all of those things. Something has got to give. Now, other people have put forward solutions and they haven't been accepted, as we see yesterday. So what I want to know now, and what people living in this part of Ireland want to know, is what solution does the British government have to offer? Because we haven't seen anything yet.
How do you explain that, Yves Bertoncini?
But what is striking is that this issue, this critical issue on the status of Northern Ireland, in fact, already has a direct link with the future negotiations. Take the divorce bill. We fix it. It doesn't say anything of the future partnership between the EU and the UK. The same is true for the status of the citizens, because what should be fixed is the status of the citizens who today are living in the UK or in the continent. It doesn't say anything of the future status.
So this is a prequel to the trade talk
But as regards Northern Ireland,
yeah,
we already see a bridge toward the future status. And that's why, by the way, Scotland is stepping in and London is claiming for something. So that's why it's very critical and asymmetric again, because for the EU, it's not vital to have the respect of the Good Friday Agreement. Again, I'm a bit cynical in saying this. But what is vital on the other side is to have sufficient guarantees not to create the impression that not only Northern Ireland, but the UK as a whole could obtain in the future partnership a status with no certainty as regards regulatory convergence or alignment, with no certainty as regards the jurisdiction in charge of applying common rules, if you want to be more or less in a common economic area, if you don't want to call it a single market. And that's why it's difficult for Theresa May to obtain a deal. Maybe sufficient progress, but a deal in a very short run will be very difficult.
Very short run, difficult. She's got a disagreement within her own cabinet, disagreement within her own party, disagreement within the country, disagreement in Ireland.
If you want to ask me if the Brexit is a mess, yes, it's
yeah, no, my question is just a purely political one to finish on. How's she doing? How is Theresa May's leadership in this?
I don't know.
Could it have been any better?
Shakespeare piece we should reread to understand her situation today.
Could she have done better?
I think her mistake first is to have interpreted the Brexit in a hard manner, let's say, in a hard way, because Brexit means very basically no MEPs in Strasbourg any longer, no commissioner from the UK, and no direct jurisdiction of the ECG. But apart from that, it could mean a lot of things as regards the relation to single market customs union.
She should have played her cards closer to her chest.
She played the card directly, saying we want to out Brexit. So now it makes the situation contradictory for her as regards the status of Northern Ireland in particular, and more generally.
Leo Ringer, is it too late for her to up her game?
I mean, I think Theresa May's premiership is in its dying phase. The question is kind of when and how long can she remain in this weak state. But I think what I'd noticed that it's actually a weak and relatively stable state. As Patricia said earlier, the DUP have a vested interest in keeping her in power. The alternative is probably a Jeremy Corbyn-led government. They have money attached to that deal they've struck with Theresa May, and her own backbenchers, even those pushing for a harder form of Brexit, have a strong incentive to keep her as the one delivering Brexit rather than risk their luck with a Corbyn-led administration and the kind of Brexit he designed. So I'd characterize her position absolutely as weak, and she could have managed the last 24 hours better. Of course she could. She could have walked away with a deal. But I don't think this fundamentally changes the fact that she's weak but relatively stable for the short term.
All right, Yves Bertoncini called it Shakespeare. It's certainly a cliffhanger. Leo Ringer, I want to thank you for joining us from London. Patricia McBride for being with us from Derry. Yves Bertoncini, stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Simon Harding.
Hi, Francois.
Leo Ringer there saying that the premiership of Theresa May could be in its dying days.
Absolutely, and the focus on social media, and in fact in the media there's been incredible buzz on what is going to happen to Theresa May. One, to illustrate that, the top news on Twitter today was in fact the British government saying this is not a failure. The UK and EU could still reach an agreement, but then if you look at the main headlines in the English press, it pointed to the exact opposite. You have The Guardian there saying the DUP wrecks May's Brexit deal. The Independent saying that May was humiliated as the DUP scuppers the deal. And of course, the Financial Times was saying that Brexit divorce derailed at the 11th hour, which basically means that the deal was almost there, but of course it fell through. And that all goes to show how much pressure Theresa May is actually under. Jeremy Corbyn was very quick to react, saying the reason for today's failure in the Brexit talks is the grubby deal the Tories did with the DUP after the election. Each passing day provides further evidence that Theresa May's government is completely ill-equipped to negotiate a successful deal for our country. Corbyn, who has of course been asked to intervene even more as the procedures are going on. Some people, Francois, this is quite funny, were actually hinting that David Cameron is the man to blame for this, saying that he gambled away his country for his ego and ran away to let others sort out the problems when he lost. Which,
where is that plaque?
It's from a satirical journal.
Oh, okay.
It's nothing.
You won't find it on the
No, it's nothing official. But it does show that the sentiment in the UK that people don't hold Theresa May completely responsible for what's going on. But of course, that obviously leads to people who do think that, and you can see this here, the hashtag Brexit shambles, which goes to hint how much of a crisis Britain is in and how much, of course, people are confused, whether it be the political class, whether it be the media, and of course people in Britain, and obviously asking whether they should leave the EU without a deal, cancel Brexit, or whether May should resign. That goes on to what The Independent published. Rachel Roberts was saying that this could be the beginning of the end for the Prime Minister, the government, and perhaps even Brexit, which echoes...
Is that wishful thinking?
Well, it does seem like it is wishful thinking, but it's come to a stage when no one really knows what's going on, and therefore anything seems to be on the table. And that's certainly what Fintan O'Toole says in The Guardian. Hard Brexiteers have just discovered Britain is weaker than Ireland, which goes to show how much of a blow this has been to the British government, to the Brexit campaign, and of course to Theresa May as a whole. And we were talking about this just earlier, Francois, but this cartoon here was in the Irish Times, an article by Dennis Staunton, and you can see here Arlene Foster chasing Theresa May away with a border pole, and you can see how much of an implication that is. And obviously the cartoon is much an exaggeration, but...
Yves Bertoncini, a bit of hyperbole there to say Ireland is stronger than Britain.
Well, but that's what Brexit means. It's kind of diminutio capitis of London. London was much more, and is still powerful within the EU, much more than out.
Absolutely. That power perhaps being questioned once again. The Spiegel for a little bit more of an international reaction. And what's funny here isn't exactly the border claim, but it's the subcategory which this article has put in, potential catastrophe, which of course hints that this story is not finished at all. The new statements, which talks about the current affairs in the UK, quick to remind everyone, as you were saying earlier as well, that the divorce bill and, of course, citizens' rights is still a big question of contention, and that the border is not the only thing. And perhaps just to finish on a lighter note, Francois, this final tweet which comes from a parody account of Theresa May, who says that she's just trying to get through Brexit and hoping for the best. But I think that really shows what situation the government and Theresa May finds herself in today.
All right, Simon Harding, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.